All right, Jose. Well, thank you very much for joining the podcast. I still haven't even named it yet, so I should probably be working on that as well. But super excited to chat about your journey as a delivery service provider owner through Amazon. And so, if you could start out, Jose, just tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe, where you come from, and before becoming a DSP owner, what were you doing and what made you take that DSP leap?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. Well, this is a first for me, so hopefully it works out. So, um, I had never worked in the logistics business until I kind of got involved with Amazon, and I started out as a delivery driver. So I had a little bit different journey, I suppose, than most DSPs. Started out as a driver, and then a manager in the operations of the Amazon delivery company that I was at. And after 3 years, I applied to be a DSP owner, and I got a contract within just a few months. All very untypical type of stuff to kind of happen. So it was good. It worked out for me.
Yeah. And so, how long have you owned your DSP and where is it located, Jose?
3 years now, coming this May, and located in the heartland of Iowa. Des Moines is where I'm based out of. So,
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the 3 years.
yeah.
Um, I'd like to know, so you went through this journey. I mean, you got into the logistics world, started working at Amazon, and then where it must have been great at your role, got this position as a DSP owner. What was your first reaction when you realized you were now responsible for the people, the vehicles, the routes every single day?
So see, that's a little different just because I was already doing it right
Okay.
for 3 years. I think the part that and I was quite successful at it when I was managing someone else's DSP, right? Um, was doing basically anything and everything you could imagine when it comes to running a business, hiring, terminations, recruiting, operations, managing fleet, kind of like, as DSP owners, our hats are in everything. The only thing now on top of that I do is managing vendors, fleet costs, a lot of big administrative type things. So I don't know. I feel like I was prepared for it, and I knew what I was getting into. And we ramped quite successfully, and the ramp period is super important, I believe, for DSPs. That first 5 6 months to hitting our first Christmas holiday peak season, right? Which is a super important time of year in any delivery industry, right? So typically the model is to ramp up at a slow, steady pace. And standard ramp plans are generally like, it's like 5, 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, meaning that's how many routes you run. And by the end of the 6 weeks or 2 month period, you're running 20 routes. For me, I was running 19 routes in my first week, right? And to be able to do that, right, successfully, and grow at that capacity and not have any misses along the way, because there's a lot of ways that we're graded upon in the in this industry, right? To make sure that we're meeting quality, that you're not growing too fast, and incurring hiring the wrong people, and incurring vehicle damage, and things like that add up over time. So we were quite successful in doing that, and so much so that we grew in our first 5 months to running 60 routes with 120 employees. So again, very non-typical DSP experience, but I think my knowledge and experience of having come from the industry for 3 years and being that involved in every aspect of the DSP world, minus the owner part of everything, right? The operations I had down, right? So I had that going for me, and yeah, it's been quite a journey. Post that, within a year and a half of launching my DSP, I assisted in a couple pop-up, what we call pop-up locations, in two other cities, basically back to back. So if at that time I learned what my limits were.
Gotcha. I love it.
I never knew where they were, and now I know where they are.
I mean, and I love that like promotion within, that ability to already know what you need to do to run the company, make it successful. And it sounds like you really hit the ground running. So, I mean, kudos to you for really just creating success off the bat.
Yeah, yeah. And it does, I was able to build a framework and really test the waters when I was running a company for someone else to see what worked, what didn't work. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my business, right? So
Right.
I was kind of limited as to what I could do. So when I finally got my opportunity, I was able to put into action a lot of the processes and culture and atmosphere that I wanted to be able to create a successful DSP, and it's been working out so far.
That's great. So, what surprised you the most about running a DSP that people outside the industry would never guess?
What surprised me the most, that other people would never guess? Um, Probably the differences as the years go on. I knew there was going to be some, what we call like aging fleet, right? Just the costs that kind of grow over time, right? That you don't necessarily experience at the very beginning. That's I learned from other DSPs' experience, right? I didn't have to follow my own and fail, right? I could see the trends that were kind of happening, right, as people were leaving and why they were failing and all of that. But it was an adjustment that every DSP owner kind of has to make over time to figure out how to manage those costs as they start to come in the longer that you're around, right? Um, so the money's pretty good in the beginning, and then you start to be around for a while, and hopefully you put something away.
Yeah, I gotcha. And
Yeah.
Jose, for yourself, what were you doing before owning a DSP? Like before you joined Amazon, what kind of work were you doing?
So I had lived in South Florida for 10 years before I moved to Iowa, and worked in hospitality, bars, bar managers, things like that. And then I moved to Iowa, and I was kind of a little tired of that hustle and bustle kind of life, so I thought. And I worked for an HVAC wholesale house for 4.5 years, 5 years, which was as slow as you can get, right?
Wow.
You
Yeah.
and like three, four other people, and you're basically selling to contractors and stuff like that, all their equipment and everything. So it was good for me to kind of have that peace. Um, I think it was preparing me for what was to come next, because I realized that I need that high pressure, fast paced, have to constantly be moving and working towards something. So that's how I ended up in the Amazon space, but it was kind of unintentional. I had other plans to do other things, maybe open a bakery or something like that. But
Nice.
the biggest thing that really changed everything, not just for me, but I imagine for a lot of people, was when COVID came through, right? And everything shut down, right? And so that kind of put a halt on my plans. And I was like, well, Amazon's right down the street. Let's go and check it out. And never did I expect, in that moment, that I would be where I'm at today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It
Uh,
was a life-changing decision, I feel, right there.
yeah, and it was unintentional, unexpected. And
Right.
then once I got in there, I think the job as a delivery driver is something that's kind of underappreciated, right? And um, what I mean by that is like, you know, when you're used to working in corporate offices or in really fast-paced moving, not for yourself, but like working in those kind of environments, you kind of appreciate the solitude and the peace that you kind of experience. When you spend 10 hours a day, basically exercising. So good for the body, good for the soul, and and that's what I enjoyed about it, right? And the way that my brain works and it never stops, moving. That part of like trying to make things better and trying to kind of improve, really kind of set me down a track to where I'm at now, right?
Yeah, amazing. And I mean, to everybody listening, we should definitely highlight. So, in the birth of Happy Fleet, Jose was the first person to be interested in joining an advisory team to kind of build out Happy Fleet. So, without Jose, Happy Fleet would not have happened. So, I definitely want to highlight that and thank you, Jose, for contributing to this mission that we started and now have been doing for over a year. So, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of benefits I see in that space, right? Especially in what I do. There's just so many hours worked trying to manage 120 plus employees, right? And just the amount of work that goes into that. And in our space, it's usually the one person on the top managing everything, and then the longer you're around and the more you grow and the more variables you kind of throw into place, you really start looking for ways to kind of use technology to improve your process. So I do see a lot of benefit there.
Yeah, and Jose, as we move along too, I mean, I've now had a bigger vision for what we're doing to be this agentic operating system for delivery companies. And so, and this kind of goes to some of the last time we chatted, some of the challenges you were having around, like invoice miscalculations and like things that really there should be things in place. So I'll talk to you more about that as we advance through the build out of more features and product for Happy Fleet. But I'm excited for that because especially the way your mentality is and how you're always looking to improve, the efficiencies, make things better. It's having someone like you as an early adopter makes it an incredible experience for us too as we build to try and help you and help your needs. So I'm excited for that as well. So when it comes to like a normal day in your life, what does that look like as a DSP owner?
A normal day. I spend a lot of times in claims with workman's comp. It's really, really not fun stuff, right? And there's two types of days that I have. One is when I'm at home, and then one is when I'm at site, on site. And the one when I'm at site tends to be a little bit more rewarding than the work I have to do when I'm at home. When I'm at home, I'm working through claims, through invoice reconciliations, disputes, accident claims, workman's comp, fleet allocations, all these, disputes that I have to submit through a very archaic system that is really tedious and time consuming to be able to communicate with Amazon or whoever to get payments remitted correctly, right? So I spend a lot of time on the back end doing that, right? And like I said, that's really where I see the benefit for some automated AI or technology or whatever that can pull that information. 'Cause I started using it myself too to be able to streamline and gather and process data because I have tons of data, right? Data about anything and everything that you can imagine. It's always said that Amazon is a delivery company, but they're a tech company first, right? And so there's data about everything and how to process that data or access that data as quickly and efficiently as possible, right? There's ways to do that. But that's kind of my typical day. Today I spent the day reaching out to some vendors to submit some payments for some claims that came through and following up and submitting. The workman's comp is super painful because no matter how accurate you submit your information in the beginning, you're resending the same information to different people over and over and over again. So that's not fun. But the fun part is when I'm on site. When I'm on site and I'm there with my employees and they're all eager to, we run a pretty good ship and coming from being a delivery driver, right? It's my kind of mission, not only to make money for myself in this business, but to also create a good working environment in an industry that really can, I don't want to say take advantage, but really kind of like, it's a grind, right? Day after day after day after day, for my employees. So to try to create a good working environment for them, but the mentoring and coaching and creating opportunities and finding ways to kind of be of service to the people that work under me, right? I think I appreciate that more than anything, and it's probably why I stay doing this, sometimes when I'm pushed to the limits and I'm really questioning what am I doing.
Yeah, I gotcha. And
Yeah,
that's interesting too, because when you're coming from that world, like the challenges, you've gone through the ranks, so you've experienced it all. So you can probably speak to it better to your employees so that they understand the benefits and what the future might look like. Have any of your employees gone on to own or to take over a DSP yet?
I have one that's in the process. She's actually going through the program called Road to Ownership. A lot of times when I tell people that I've worked for a DSP before, they assume that I kind of went through the same program. I didn't. I didn't want to wait. And so I went through the same channels that any average person, wanting to pursue an Amazon career this way. So I went through those channels, right? Which you end up, coming from a larger pool of people than like these select people that get pulled from there. But I do have one. She would be my first. But it's not uncommon that a lot of people want that opportunity, right? A lot of managers, or people that get into this space like that are very entrepreneurial thinking, right? That, think, hey, I can do that, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
can imagine.
Yeah.
And it always seems too when I talk to the Amazon or the DSP owners, it's like they're the first like year or two is the most difficult, but once they have their processes in place and things start to become routine, that's when you get to just I think you enjoy the opportunity that you have much more. Have you had that same experience?
No, I think mine was different. Like I said, just because I hit the ground running, I had my processes and my
You
roadmap in
already
place.
had it going, so it's even better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so I was like, that was the easy part, right? Now it's just execution and motivation and getting
got it.
people to have a vision that I had, right? It's like, and just to kind of go in a little bit more detail. So when I started hiring for my DSP, it was 2 hours away from where I lived. So I was working at like a co-working kind of station. And I understood the challenges when a new company comes in, how it only benefits everyone else around them if that person fails, right? And sometimes in our industry and a lot of businesses, right, like some opportunities only happen when other people fail, right? And then that creates more opportunity for you to grow, right? So nobody's really kind of your friend in the beginning, right? And so I understood that, right? Like I understood the relationships with my peers, right? Other companies that work side by side and like everybody's trying to get ahead, right? And so I understood the challenges that kind of came with that. So I did my interviewing off-site, and meanwhile nobody knew I was kind of coming through until the day I showed up.
Ah,
So and then when I showed up, I had about 17 to 20 people just starting every single day, right? So now they're seeing like who's this guy and like who are all these people, right? And like we came to play, you know what I mean? And so when I started first doing my interviews, I had a group of people that reached out to me, managers and employees that were coming from a company that was exiting the program, right? And so here I am. So they had two or three other places to go, right? And what really sold them on the idea for me was really kind of building out. Like I said, I had my roadmap, right? And they've been in the industry for now 3 years, right? So they kind of understand certain ways that DSP operate, but I was coming in with a completely different model, right? In every aspect. And it was very exciting to them, right? They're like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, and laid it out for them, really transparent. I was like, this will work. We just have to do it. You know what I mean? And they were really kind of excited about it, right? And that kind of excitement just bled into everybody else on my team as I began to hire them. And I hired about 9 people to be all part of this leadership team. But you can't have 9 people not earning money, just kind of, especially when you're first starting out. So I built a system that really worked for me, but also worked for them. And, which is why without their buy-in, I would not have been able to grow the way that I did in the way that I wanted to. So, yeah.
Sounds like a perfect start. So, I mean, not only did you come in knowing what you needed to do, but then you also had experienced people who bought into your mission. So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was there with them every day for 6 months, like
Right.
every single day, 10, 12 hours a day for 6 months. And I did one of the things that I will say that was super important to me, and just understanding what I needed to do to accomplish what I needed to do, was I did all of my own interviewing, right? And bringing people on board, because it's different when you apply for a job, right? And you're just talking to a face, but when you realize that you're talking to an owner, I didn't tell people I was the owner, right? They would find out kind of like later, which is always something that was fun for me, right? It's like, I'd interview them, hire them, and kind of give them a pitch and get them all excited and everything. And then they show up and then they're like, oh, that guy owns this thing? Yeah.
You're like, well, at least, yeah, I'm sure many of them were like, okay, reviewing in their head, what did I say?
Yeah, well, the reason in part that I did that is because I needed to be able to convince them that they wanted to come work for me, right? As opposed to
Right.
like 2 other companies that, one, they were offering more money, or they'll do whatever they can to try to get that person not to go to you, especially when you're first starting out. So I found that a lot of times, yes, money's a big motivator, but it's not the reason people stay.
Right.
And if you can kind of convince them or get them to like really understand that it's kind of a mutual relationship here, and I value you and you value me, and this is what we can do together, that they stayed, right? And they decided to kind of come on board. So that was something for like 6 months I did myself, right? And I was really good at it before that, right? With the company that I had worked with previously, just taking over the hiring, because that's really where everybody's journey starts, right? That first interaction that you have with people.
So how has that changed for you now, Jose, with the hiring aspect?
It took me a long time to be able to there's 2 things that really have been difficult for me to figure out how to pass on. One was that hiring portion of it, and the other is payroll, right? It's 2 things that I feel like really impact my business and my cash flow, right? So it took me hiring. I did kind of pass it on. But that didn't really happen for a while. I think it happened at the time when I started to branch out into having another DSP, because now I couldn't be at 2 places at once, and but I'm
But you're
really
running,
involved.
running two, or you only have one, Jose?
I only have one now. The other 2
Okay.
were kind of like temporary locations. One
Okay.
lasted for 4 months. The other one lasted for 8 months. So for a year, we were operating. Yeah, as so it was fun. It was fun for me, and it was also fun for my team, because I ran it as one company, right? So I had operations at one site in a different state, managing operations in another state.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And then I had some, boots on the ground there, right, that manage, all the really daily stuff. So it allowed me to kind of consolidate, my resources without having to, put so much overhead and operational costs in operating those other 2. Thank goodness I did, because they turned out not to be very profitable. So
Gotcha. Um, So I got another question for you. Let's say, so what's a let's see here. What keeps you up at night more? Hiring, safety, performance metrics, and why does one of those?
Honestly, it's got to be safety that keeps me up the most because there's people involved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's a human cost to everything. You know what I mean? And some days you don't think about it, right? But 120 employees on the road, 10 hours a day,
Yeah.
in a vehicle in rural America, urban America here with dogs and just people, and that's what keeps me up at night, right? Like anytime my phone rings, that's the first thing that pops into my head, right? Like it's taken me a long to kind of like, is this the call?
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's like if you have kids, right? You know what I mean? I don't have kids, but I imagine that's what it's like, right? Like, I think that's what keeps me up, right? Just the unpredictable, the unknown. But you build good processes, you build good systems, and you trust the people that work for you to kind of, you know, hold people accountable to those systems. And you can only do what you can do, I think that's some of the inherent risks with operating a delivery business, but we manage those fairly well. But I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that definitely, definitely. So I guess in your world, and going back to the hiring aspect, what does a great driver look like for your business?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I have two. There's two because I guess a good driver to me is someone who's reliable and who's dedicated to their job, right? What I mean by that is like nothing in what a delivery driver does is copy and paste. Even though their job is repetition, is the same. Motions that they go through every day is different, right? And they have to be able to troubleshoot any encounter that they experience, and learn how to overcome those, right? When it comes to, I don't know, this typical day, delivery, and they'll show up to a house and the locker's not working, or they can't get into an apartment building, or the gate's locked out front, or there's a huge dog outside, but that package, still has to get delivered somehow, you know what I mean? And our days are planned out pretty, with very little wiggle room, right? So
Right.
how do you manage that, right? How do you manage to stay on time with your deliveries and do all that? So I guess I used to, in the beginning, I saw a lot of mistakes where companies would hire like the fastest person that could get their routes done, right? And to me, those are not they're good in their experience and when they're around for a while, but you tend to experience a lot more other issues, accidents, injuries, things like that they may make you some money on the front end, but on the back end is where they're costing
Yeah,
you a
you're gonna
ton of
pay
money.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So slow and steady really does it for me. I don't need you to be the fastest. As long as you're getting your stuff done and you're responsible and you show you want to be here, that's to me an ideal candidate. For people who do what I do.
Yeah, that's perfect. Um, let's see. So what was I think these are good ones. So how has technology changed the way you run your DSP compared to when you started?
Very differently. Very differently. I ran everything on spreadsheets before.
Wow. Yeah.
Spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel. That's how I manage my fleet. That's how I manage my morning operations. That's how I told you when you needed to be to work. That's how I told you anything and everything about the shop. You got a spreadsheet,
Yeah.
about it. Which is really honestly how I had to operate in the beginning because I couldn't afford, some technical, there's a bunch of stuff that's out there, um, and it's expensive, and they market to the DSP space, and when you're first starting out, those dollars just aren't there. I don't think I earned a paycheck for, 6, 7, 8 months,
Wow.
and just because, that was my experience.
Yeah, Jose, explain how that looks. So, like, what does it look like as a DSP owner when you're starting? So, because I don't have an understanding of that. So, does Amazon, do, and it's interesting because when I was at Ignite, I ran into someone and he was like, "Well, as long as you have like 20 or 40,000 in a bank account, then Amazon will let you start the DSP." But
Yeah.
how does that work? Does Amazon give you money up front, or is it every route? Like, how does it work in that world?
You basically have to cover a payroll cycle. That's the amount of money that you need to be able to cover, right? Because your payments in your first year are delayed by a week, right?
Got it.
So your first when you're processing your first payroll, you don't get paid for that until after that payroll's processed. So you need to be able to cover that first initial cost, right? Everything else is kind of built into the cake from the beginning, right? Our leases, fleet, things like that. There are out of pocket expenses like phones, computers, delivery devices, uniforms, things like that. And that's really what the $30,000 is for, right? To kind of get your basic tools and equipment that you need to do the job based on the standards that Amazon requires, right? And was 30,000 enough? Just barely. But again, I didn't come into this to just run at baseline, and that's kind of where I mean, like, when I was running what I'm supposed to be running, 2 months down the road in my first week, like my payroll then was like huge. It's different if you're doing payroll for 5 people than doing payroll for 30 people in your first week. You know what I mean? And then to be able to manage that churn, because just because we ramped up to 120 employees, I hired maybe 600 to 800 employees throughout that time to be able to keep up with that pace.
So crazy.
And
Right,
again,
like
as I told
volume
you,
galore. Yeah.
yeah, and until you find the people that are going to stay,
Right.
and then you treat them well. But I'll mention again, like I did all of that interviewing and managing. Yeah, I had a team, but it was me that going through, because how do you hire effectively, and strategically, and but knowing what my end goal and my purpose was really kind of helped me out, right?
Yeah.
There was a period of time, maybe like 4 or 5 months into it, that I found myself in a position that, you know, yes, growth was good, but could I financially afford to grow at that pace? So I really had to kind of slow down in like my 4 month period just to make sure that the numbers matched, right? So what I was getting at is, like, I didn't earn a paycheck for a long time. And the reason for that is because any money I had coming in was paying for that growth that I was experiencing, right? Um, so then when I kind of like peaked, and became stable for a while, then I was able to earn some income, but
Got it.
up until that point, it was just going right back in where it came from, so yeah.
No, and that's great info. I mean, for anybody starting out launching a DSP, because especially if you don't have the knowledge, I think you're going to make more mistakes. So it's like have more buffer. Or what you were saying, you brought on a lot of people fast. So the someone who might be starting out is going to have less people. So maybe we'll
Yeah.
have more buffer, right? So,
Yeah.
wow. And so going back to that technology aspect, so you started out on spreadsheets, but then slowly the technology came, and then what does that look like now versus what it was? And what do you actually have in your stack too, Jose? We might as well give plugs to the ones that are helping you out.
Yeah. So right now, the one that I have, and again, it took me a long time to even move in this direction, just because I don't believe in what I call fluff-ware, right? Like a bunch of cool, shiny things that are really great, but am I going to use them, and am I going to use them every day, right? So there's a company that I found. They're called Loki Tech, and it was really low cost, $500 a month, which is a half or a third of what some of these other companies are out there. And it was created by another company, DSP, like myself, and it was really kind of built in a way to help manage day-to-day operations and everything that I use every day. So there was nothing in it that I didn't use every day. And I found that really kind of beneficial. And then they eventually partnered with some other, Smart Health Plus, I think is what it is, that basically covered the entire cost for it. So now it was free, right, to be able to use it. So that was like great, you know. Um, so now it becomes like at no cost to me. And there's other ones. When I was working for the former company that I worked for, we used Hera, and it was good, but I only used it for one or two things, and the cost of that was $10 per employee per month, right? And even if that employee, you fired them in the middle of the month, you still have to pay for them at the end of the month, right? So it's not like a clean cut number, right? Like a flat number. And if you have 120 employees, that's $1,200 minimum that you're paying a month
Yeah.
for something that you're only using that wasn't really built, to really target a lot of the issues that we experience. Like we were talking about invoice reconciliation, which is part of Loki's platform, and now they've kind of partnered into a company called LinkOps. Um, so that's kind of what I use now. And then, as I approached my second, third year, where I really kind of had to monitor and manage, fleet a lot better, right? Because that's when it starts to get expensive because it's getting older and there's more, dings and damage and flat.
Now I understand what you're saying. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. So
New
those
vehicles
costs come
getting
later.
old. Yeah,
Yeah, when you're driving a brand new 2026, ProMaster, what are you going to pay on it?
yeah.
Not a whole lot. you know.
Gotcha.
But, that road's, you put 40,000, 20,000 miles on it a year and it's on these heavy gravel roads. Like, you're going to have chunked out tires, underbody carriage issue, brake issues.
Gosh.
I mean, that all stuff kind of comes later. So,
Yeah.
so I use a company called Whip Around, which not too many DSPs use it. But the reason I used them was because I was able to negotiate a really low flat rate because I was operating at 3 sites, and at a time there was a time when I had almost 100 vehicles in my fleet, right? And they charged me a super low rate of $350 a month, and it was basically an AI tool that we could snap pictures of it, and it basically pulls data, out of that picture, to show you where all the new damages occur, right? So it uses that technology to really kind of determine and you kind of tell it what you want it to look for. So you're able to track, body damage before and after the day was over, cleanliness of the vehicle. You can even take a picture of your, engine compartment, and it tells you if your fluids are low.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but as this other company kind of improves, and Amazon's really kind of finally, it launched this week, really taking, or acknowledging that DSPs have been spending a lot of money in this space to be able to manage fleet issues. So they rolled out, an inspection process through the delivery app that they use for my employees. So it's yet to see if it's actually going to be useful or not, but yeah.
So Jose, we've only got a few minutes left. I guess one final question: what's the craziest thing that's happened since you owned a DSP?
Oh, the craziest thing that's happened. Oh, it's going to take me a minute. I don't know where to go with this one.
Okay.
uh,
And I
yeah,
mean, and I will tell you, this will probably be cut out, but the first one I did, he ended up telling me that there was a death in one of the vehicles. So I cut
yeah.
that. I can't include that, but interested to hear what you would say.
Um, I wouldn't say it's the craziest, but it's one of the most memorable things. Just as when you're hiring people, and you just never know what you're gonna get. And I remember hiring this lady, and she seemed super excited, like she wanted to do the job. Took her, and I'm really kind of like doom and gloom sometimes when I hire people. You're going to be driving through the craziest snowstorms
Right.
and rainfall and like through tornadoes and lightning and all that stuff. Like really kind of lay it on thick to like help people understand, like, We deliver almost every day out of the year in all kinds of weather. And so she made it through the entire process. And her first day, she hopped in the van, drove maybe a half a mile away, and then turned around and came back and was like, "Yeah, no, this isn't for me." I was like, "Oh, what just happened here?"
So it wasn't bad weather or anything. Like, was it? I mean, was it bad?
Nothing.
No, just she just decided after like a half-mile drive that this was not it. That's great. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, that was funny.
Well, Jose, I mean, this has been great. I appreciate your time. Once again, thank you for everything that you've done for us at Happy Fleet. And obviously, it sounds like you run a tight ship, and it seems like you love what you do, and I can tell just as you chat about it, which is incredible.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and I wish you the best as you continue your business, and obviously we'll keep chatting and working together. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do it again whenever. Like I
Okay.
said, I've been doing this for a long time. It's my life. So,
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thanks, Jose. All right, let me
all
just
right. I'll see you.